Morning. This is the Joint Legislative Child Protection Oversight Committee meeting. It is October 29th, and we have a very full agenda today. We're continuing to look at the role, if any, that our administration might play in overseeing residential schools, facilities for kids when there are no children in state custody in those schools. So that's one topic we're looking at. We're trying to identify what's going on. What does the AOE think about this, the Agency of Education? What's the role of DCF? And then we'll also be looking at the Family First Plan that the Agency of Human Services has submitted to the federal government and going through that. We did submit some questions, so we'll hopefully get some answers to the questions that we asked. So that's our morning, and then in the afternoon we'll go further with a report from UVM's custody issues. A lot of important issues today. Our goal today is to try to finish by noontime, if we can, with our morning schedule, but it is scheduled to end at 12:15. There are some folks here who need to be elsewhere at noon, and we're going to try to accommodate that as much as possible. So before we begin, I'll just like to go around the table and begin with Senator Westman, and then say hello and introduce yourself for people who might be out on Zoom.
I'm Rich Westman. I'm the senator from Lamoille. The two committees I sit on in the Senate are Natural Resources in the morning and Appropriations in the afternoon. And most of my budgets are this area that we're discussing today in the afternoon committee and appropriations.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Jessup. I serve as a state representative and represent the towns of East Montpelier and Middlesex. I serve on appropriations, and many of my budgets parallel those of Senator Westman.
Jenny Lyons, senator representing Chittenden County, and I chair the Senate Health and Welfare Committee.
And I'm Ann Pugh. I represent streets of South Burlington, but really all of South Burlington. And I chair the House Human Services Committee.
Representative Kelly Pyala. I live in Londonderry and represent Londonderry, Weston, Stratton, Jamaica, and Winhall, and I sit on House Human Services.
Senator Sears.
Yeah, Dick Sears, State Senator, Bennington County, and the town of Wilmington. And I serve as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as well as a member of the Senate Appropriations with Senator Westman.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. We have, as I said, a full agenda, so we're going to begin with an update from Emily Simmons at the AOE and look at an overview of the new board rules. So Emily, welcome. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Senator Lyons and committee members. Thank you for inviting me back for an update. My upfront part of this will be very short, but I expect that you have questions for us to discuss.
Emily, I'm going to ask if you could speak up a little bit or more directly into the mic. That would be very helpful.
Of course, that should help. So a matter of follow-up first. When I last was in the committee following our discussion, I shared 3 documents with the committee. 2 were about the agency's review of Kern-Hatton, and 1 was the text of the proposed state board rule for the approval of independent schools. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew I sent those materials as follow-up, and you can also ask me any questions about those Kern-Hatton materials if those come up. So the first thing I wanted to cover with you is that newly proposed rule by the state board that would impact approved independent schools that have a residential or boarding program. Procedurally, this rule is toward the end of the administrative rulemaking process. 4 public hearings have been held, and the public comment period closes next week on the 5th. So this rule, assuming everything goes to plan, will be making its way to ICAR within the next, LCAR within the next several months. The relevant portion of the rule is on the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8 of the rule document. Its relevant text says that in order to be approved, which means to receive the state board's approval that the school can enroll publicly funded students.
Emily, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I'm not finding the documents that you identified on our webpage.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out that also. Let me look at the last meeting, what I posted, the men there. Let me see, I just emailed it to everybody though, just so you.
Okay, so they have been emailed to us. That's good. So we'll, why doesn't everyone just take a minute, check your email, and then Peggy's gonna help find where they are.
Emily, if I make you the co-host, could you share it for the time being while I post them?
Sure, be happy to do that. I have it pulled up as well. When I emailed Peggy, I provided a link in the body of my email.
Okay, you should be the co-host to share it in the meantime.
Okay. Okay, I now believe I'm displaying Rule 2227 approval. And if you're not seeing that, shout out at me. The relevant portion is this second underlined paragraph. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little for you all. That should be a little better. It's this, oh, my apologies. It's this paragraph that I've just highlighted.
Is that in,
I don't have that either. Do we have that?
No, we have 2 letters about Kern Hatton.
We have 2 letters about Kern Hatton, and then we have in the body of the letter, another email, the approval section 2227 of VSA 906.
There's a link in that email.
it's in that email, the
Hyperlink.
2227 approval is that language.
Full draft rules are located here, link.
All right, well, let's try to focus on what's up on the screen, and Emily, you're going to have to really shout because we're not
Sorry for
reading
the-
it on our iPad.
Sorry for the close-up, but here I am. I'm really leaning into my microphone. So the rule states that in order to receive that state board approval, which is tied to public funds, the independent school that operates a boarding program or enrolls students as boarding students or operates a residential treatment program shall be accredited by a state or regional agency recognized by the state board for accrediting purposes, or it shall be licensed as a residential child care facility by the Department for Children and Families. And this requirement does not apply to an independent school that enrolls only day students. So
Okay, so maybe just pause there and help us understand what this rule says. Yeah.
the first question you might have is about these accrediting agencies. There are regional and state agencies that are approved first by the United States Department of Education as the accrediting agency for a given region. The accrediting agency that covers Vermont and New England is the New England Secondary School Accreditor. It's called NEASC. NEASC accredits a majority of approved independent schools in Vermont. They have concurrent accreditation by NEASC and approval by the State Board of Education. So our independent schools are very familiar with NEASC. However, the state.
Can I ask a question about the accreditation process? The accreditation process is with regard to the educational curriculum. Does it also accredit the residential environment and services for kids?
Yes, Senator Lyons. NEASC has sets of standards for each element that a school's programming, and they have specific standards for residential programs within independent schools.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the case with each alternate accreditor. So the state board has authority in statute to recognize, is the term, various accreditors as meeting the state board's requirements for those types of accrediting agencies. NEASC is the most common. The state board is in the process of also reviewing its own standards for recognizing these accreditors, and is actually beginning rulemaking to add another New England accreditor that is perceived as specializing in smaller schools. So just for your background, the NEASC process is perceived as fitting best with medium to large sized independent schools, and is perceived as cost prohibitive for some of the very small independent schools. So to have a more diverse selection of accreditors, the state board is working on its standards for how it recognizes those accreditors. But right now, that smaller accreditor has not yet been recognized. It's in process. So really the only accreditor that could fulfill this particular rule right now is NEASC. That's one option for a school that has boarding students to receive state board approval. The only other option is to have license from DCF as a residential child care facility. So that's under RSLI. I know you had questions about the numbers, so I have that as well.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Yes. Emily, so if this rule is put in place and an independent school does not get accreditation, they would not then be considered an approved independent school?
Correct. Assuming that they are not licensed by DCF, that school would lose state board approval under this rule.
And if they were also not licensed by DCF, where then would that leave a school or an organization that had a boarding program?
The school would not be permitted to enroll publicly funded students. Perhaps that's not really relevant to the school's enrollment pattern. Perhaps it is. The school, in order to enroll any students in Vermont, and for those students to not be truant, must register as a recognized independent school by filing what's called an enrollment notice with the Agency of Education before the start of the school year.
So a school could continue to operate just under a different standard, and students, just making sure I understood what you said, wouldn't get publicly funded tuition.
That's correct. It begs the question, what are the standards for that enrollment notice for recognition? They are essentially that the school provide its name and address, that it give its beginning of the school day and end of the school day to confirm that it operates enough time in the year, and to assure that it provides the minimum course of study, which is in statute, as well as complies with the safety and health provisions in law, which are essentially mandatory reporting, facilities requirements such as fire drills, compliance with background check requirements, and then once assuring in that enrollment notice, the school is registered as a recognized school.
And the Agency of Education would still be overseeing all of the compliance with all of those standards.
That's correct. The compliance with those standards is not a question of how well the school is doing under those requirements. It's a very soft touch sort of compliance. We're not given very much authority at all over the operations of those schools. It's really to confirm compliance with those 5 elements, and that's it.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Jessup.
I'm familiar when NEASC does review of tertiary ed, they use a peer review process, and it's done on a certain calendar basis every so many years. Is there any peer component to this review, and on what calendar basis does it operate?
So accreditation under this state board rule for boarding programs would, as we understand it, include NEASC's peer review, which is a site visit by a panel of reviewers who are also in the independent school community. That is a different cycle for a new school, but is generally a 10-year cycle. But for Vermont approved schools, there is a 5-year interim review because the state board cannot give up to 10 years of approval. So they can go up to 5 years. And NEASC is actually very willing to amend its standards to comply with the various state laws so that the two are in harmony. And so for Vermont schools, NEASC conducts interim reviews for schools as they come up for state board review of approval. It's not the full review. The really comprehensive review, I believe, is on a 10-year cycle for NEASC.
If there are any findings that are flagged during that process, are those dealt with by the peer review team, or are they shared with the Agency of Ed? And if they are shared, what has the Agency of Ed done with those findings specifically relating to Kern-Hatton?
Kern-Hatton is not accredited by NEASC, so that's not relevant to them at this time. They're seeking or have sought NEASC accreditation, but generally it's both. It's that NEASC has I'd call it a continuous improvement model for the findings that are surfaced in the reviews of its accredited schools. Those findings are also required by the state board to be shared with the agency and the board, and that's done on the cycle of approval when the school's renewal comes up to the state board. So those issues are evaluated by the state board at the time of renewal of approval or not. So this frequently the state board members will ask questions of the school's representatives at the meeting where the school is up for renewal related to what NEASC has written in its report with the findings.
Tonight,
Senator Sears has a question and then Senator Westman.
yeah, my question is, having sat through much of the testimony from residents of Kern Hatton and the St. Joseph's Orphanage, the victims, I'm concerned that once DCF gets out of the picture, with the boarding school aspect here, not the education program at Kern Hatton or anywhere else, but the boarding school aspect, feels like there's no, feels like there's, I'm sorry. You can't hear me?
Not very well.
Okay, can I try again? Is that better?
Yes, please.
Okay, having sat through the testimony from victims at Kern Hatton and St. Joseph's Orphanage, my biggest concern is the boarding school aspect, where various behaviors were never reported. And there's a pattern of, I'm going to use the term, abuse, and both sexual and physical abuse in these programs by other students as well as by staff. And I don't see anyone overseeing that aspect of it. I see your rule and what you said, but is there anyone who, once DCF is out of the picture, is there anyone looking at the boarding school aspect? The residential?
Not directly and not in the way that your question implies. This rule, which is just proposed at this point, is the first attempt by the state board to exert some authority over that boarding program. They're not given specific authority over residential life in the statute. So this rule is the state board's effort with regard to these issues. And, you know, as the person who's been helping them from the legal perspective, I think given the way the statute is drafted, this is as far as the state board can go with its rulemaking authority. And we hope that LCAR will approve this rule, but we understand that there might even be questions from LCAR about authority for this rule, given that 166 is so focused on the education program.
Right, and as it should be, but again, I'm concerned that the state is being complicit if we don't do some oversight over those, and it may take legislation, it's clear to me what we need to do, but I would suggest that this committee needs to come up with some recommendations for legislation that will cover the boarding school.
Senator Sears, you're right on target. I think our goal here over the next few meetings is to make a decision about what kind of recommendation we might make. It's the rule that we're looking at, for me, is a pretty surface level rule. It doesn't have the teeth or the depth needed to prevent future problems that we've seen. So that'll be our discussion going forward. We did ask both the AOE and the DCF for their recommendations on improving the process and the whatever, whether it's a rule or whether it's part of legislation. But so this is where we are right now, and we will be looking to make some recommendations, I would think. Senator Westman had a question.
Well, I think you guys just hit right in where I was interested.
Okay, all right, good. So I think, any other questions for Emily Simmons for AOE?
I don't know that I have a question for Emily, but based on everything that she just shared and, you know, what Senator Sears was just driving at, it seems like the bigger question is really about the residential piece of this and not, that the term boarding school is really not what we're talking about here. And that's what and what Senator Sears was just saying, that the concern really seems to be with Kern Hatton and its residential programming practices. And from my point of view, that's where I would like to see whatever recommendations we are talking about, that's where we're looking. It seems like from the school that is provided to the people that are at that program, we want to make sure is an adequate school experience, but the big concern seems to be who's overseeing.
Good.
Yeah.
Be well said. And I think that what we'll do, unless there are other questions, Emily, do you have anything else to present to us at this time?
Just one note, Senator Lyons, you indicated you wanted a picture of the data on the number of residential schools. That's very straightforward. There are 22 approved independent schools with a residential or boarding component. Breaking that down, currently 13 have NEASC accreditation, so they already satisfy this newly proposed rule. 6 are licensed by RSLI, so within DCF, which leaves 3 that are neither licensed nor accredited. It's 2 ski academies and Kern Hatton.
Okay, and do we have this information to be posted?
Yeah, it's all posted now.
Okay, now it's posted, so that's helpful. Thank you for that. That's very useful information for us to have. But I think, is there anything else you would like to share at this point?
It might be taking a little license because I certainly haven't been asked, but I think hopefully it will help you. The agency's perspective on this gap that you're identifying is that we agree it is a gap, and that it might be helpful to know, I won't say this is the agency's point of view, it's just mine, that the current state statutes across the board when it comes to places that students live away from their homes or their guardians are more focused on the type of program in which the students reside and the services that are provided to them at that program. And so with the example that we've discussed so much together, when the school and the student body no longer required or stated that they required approval of the very specific healthcare, mental health, special education services that are clearly delineated by rule, there was not a clear regulatory hook any longer. There might be many schools where the student body has significant general need, but that need does not rise to a medical or special education level to fall under the regulatory hook. And especially from the education perspective, a parent or guardian can always waive their entitlement for their student, their right to FAPE under IDEA, special education law. And then once that is waived, the Agency of Education really loses oversight over those students because our entire authority is in those special education regulations. So if the student and the parent are not interested in that entitlement, the Agency of Education loses a lot of ability to become involved. And thanks for your-
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I did invite the chair of House Education, Kate Webb, and also the chair of Senate Education, Senator Campion, so Representative Webb and Senator Campion, to be with us today. They may be on Zoom, I don't know, but I will certainly, they are, okay, that's helpful to know. So because this takes a step outside of some of the committees that are represented here, not appropriations necessarily, but certainly takes a step outside of health and welfare and human services. And so we'll have to be continuing a teamwork effort with our education peers. But the issue really is for us, I think that Representative Pahala said it very well. It's about what role it should be played when we have residential facilities and overseeing our kids. And so we'll be digging into that and making recommendations, perhaps both to education committees as well as to our health and human services committees. So I think that's where we are right now, unless members have something else they'd like to share.
Peggy, the link doesn't work for Rule 2200, or at least it doesn't work on my computer. It goes to a page not found. I
was just going to invite the two folks who showed up, Senator Campion and Representative Webb, to please introduce yourselves to the committee and to folks. And we invite your questions at this point or comments. So we'll start with Representative Webb.
Thank you for including us on this really important conversation. We are expecting a conversation about our independent schools anyway. This year, I think certainly the aspect of concern related to the boarding facilities adds a new element, particularly in reference to only really having oversight related to special ed. So I would welcome the opportunity to have this conversation. And I think Senator Campion and I have actually talked a little bit about.
Sure. No, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. Sorry for arriving a little late. I too just appreciate being part of this conversation. Representative Webb is correct. As usual, we are looking into a number of different things related to independent schools this coming winter, and to add this to the list is perfectly appropriate. Looking forward to learning a little bit more today, and then Kate and I can connect and come up with a game plan as how we think it might be best going forward as it relates to the work that our committee oversees. So glad to be here.
Thank you both. Thank you both for being here. I'm sorry I didn't see you on the screen earlier. I would have invited you to participate a little bit more, but it sounds like you will be diving into this issue regardless. And this committee is certainly concerned about the issue and will be making recommendations that might stimulate some conversation in your committees, or not, but hopefully will. Okay. Anything else, committee? Emily, thank you so much for being with us and bringing us the rule. I sit on LCAR, so it will be fascinating to hear the conversation when it gets to LCAR. You've also heard our comments about wanting to have a slightly deeper dive into the issues around residential care for children at independent schools. And so that work will continue in the House and in the Senate. Thank you. So we're good.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
All right. So committee, we're going to move on in our agenda to best practices and policies for regulating schools. And we have with us Marilyn Villalobos, Policy Associate for NCSL. Marilyn, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Go ahead and introduce yourself for the record, and then we look forward to hearing your report. We do have the written report that you submitted. And do you have a PowerPoint or how do you want to proceed?
Yes. So hello, thank you so much for having me. I do have a PowerPoint that I'll probably start sharing right now if you give me 1 second.
Can everyone hear Marilyn okay? No. Marilyn, we're going to need increased volume or output.
Give me 1 second. Let me see. Can you guys hear me better?
We can try. The people on Zoom are lucky because they can hear you perfectly, but we're in a big room, so the sound gets diffused a little bit.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder. Is this better?
That's perfect. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I am going to share my screen and just kind of do an overall presentation of what I have for you and kind of like the process about it. And just what I found on my research. So again, thank you so much for having me. My name is Marilyn Villalobos, and I am a policy associate in the education program at the National Conference of State Legislature. So just a little bit about NCSL. We are a bipartisan organization serving legislators and legislative staff. We promote services of research. So we track over 1,400 issue areas from criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, you name it, whatever you might need. Connections, so we try to provide links between legislators and staff and just with each other across states. Training, we have our office in DC and like our meetings. So that's just a little bit about NCSL that I just wanted to bring up for people that might not be aware for the public. So I was asked to kind of present and research on the topic of school regulation, but mainly into residential, independent, and private schools. So just kind of a little bit of background. So independent schools come in all shapes and sizes. They include elementary, secondary schools, day and boarding schools, single sex and co-education.
Yes. Oh, the volume just went up in our room.
Yay.
We can hear you.
Yay. Is it better now?
That's great. Keep it loud.
So just overall independent schools, you know, vary in whether they're religious, whether they're affiliated, boarding schools, day schools, they vary in a lot of aspects of that. There, according to the National Association of Independent Schools, there are over 2,000 independent schools across the United States.
Louder. You put it down too much.
Keep it louder.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Marilyn, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Make it louder.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So there, according to the National Association of Independent Schools, there's over 2,000 private schools across the United States that provide education to over 700,000 students, just overall across the US. So a little bit of kind of how the research background went. So when I started doing all this research, I started with all of our legislative tracking databases, like all the states that we follow, tracking that came from like 2000, the year 2000, the last 20 years, kind of any sort of research or legislative action that happened in regards to residential schools. What I came to find out is that most of residential schools, independent schools, boarding schools fall under the category of private schools for like US Department of Education purposes and for any sort of legislative action that I saw. Mostly they combine them into the whole private school kind of policy side of things. So just kind of wanted to put that out there and how most of the policies fall under that purview. In most cases, because I had heard about, you know, I was looking more into the outside of the academic spectrum, and more into the whole child abuse and any of those like protection of the children that are attending these schools. Most of the cases that happen and that are in legislature in most of the states, honestly, if there is a case that is reported, it's kind of like the basic that we know of, like mandated reporting, training for teachers, and then just kind of like refer them to Department of like Human Services, Department of Child Protective Services, or law enforcement. I do have to say that throughout my research, it was actually very interesting seeing that some of the legislation and some of the policies from Department of Education, it fell strictly on public institutions, like public schools, rather than private. So a lot of the private, they had kind of that, they might not, but it was not mandated for private schools in some states. So that was very interesting to see. So just kind of going off of that, most of the residential schools, independent schools, they report to their own board of trustees and within their own associations. So there's not much that departments of education have on, and this is at the national level, on like this private schools that fall under private schools. The U.S. Department of Education does have a page for private schools and kind of what they track of accreditation and kind of what the main things. So some of the main things are within the Department of Ed and on other like state Department of Educations are more like most of them based the regulation of it on accreditation, registration, licensing, like teacher certification, length of school year, very of the basic academic side of things. When it comes to the outside of the academic, there's not so much of a regulation on these schools. So there's two main sections that I looked at when I was looking through the old U.S. Department of Ed and like Department of Education, which was kind of the record keeping and reports and the health and safety requirements. To be honest, I looked at all the 50 states, and for all the 50 states, most of them made references to like immunizations, to building safety, to fire drills, to, you know, making sure that the buildings were up to date with like standards, so on. But there was not much of any sort that I saw, to be honest, from the Department of Ed or any other Department of Education in terms of regulating, like, you know, if the students are, if it's a boarding school, who's allowed to be with the kids, who's not allowed, what are the timing hours, you know, any of the outside non-academic issues that happen with it. There was no sort of reference to any of that. So, however, I did find a couple examples that I think might be beneficial. But to be honest, kind of what am I hearing from this morning, I think Vermont might be one of the states that might be leading on this, because many of the states don't have either much of regulation with private residential boarding schools at all. So I just wanted to put that out there. So I'm going to be highlighting a couple of different states and kind of some of the policies that might, you know, make a transition or kind of work out. The first, I'm going to emphasize on, at the end, I'm going to emphasize on two main states, New Jersey and Tennessee. And California, Nevada, and Iowa are a little bit more of like very on the basic side of things, like very start, but I still wanted, there were some things in there that I found that I think they might be beneficial. Also, I know I speak a lot, so please let me know if you have any questions or anything as I go through things. So the first thing is California. So basically California, they have the basic of, you know, Child Abuse Prevention Coordinating Council, which basically it includes a set of people from the private school representatives, basically to promote awareness of abuse and neglect of children, facilitating training professionals for the detection, treatment, and prevention of child abuse, improvements in services to the families and victims, and then community support for the child and neglect programs. This is all specific to like private schools, which, you know, go into boarding, residentials, and all that. They make it very clear that the California Department of Education has no statutory authority to regulate or monitor any private schools or private education. So that is explicitly say in California. in terms of if there's any complaints made towards any of the private schools that fall into this, is they do go into, the school has to, they may have like written policies or procedures that they can request before enrolling like someone, or a contract agreement with the private schools or so on. But overall, there's really no kind of oversight over the private schools. So in Nevada, it's very short. So just each school district, including for private schools and private associations, they must just submit information regarding training for teachers and administrators on the like safety, personal safety of the children, any incidents of sexual abuse or sexual abuse of a child. So very standard that applies to everyone. And then Iowa is, so they non-public schools, which refers to, in the code, refers to private schools, residential schools, boarding schools. They must show procedures for handling child abuse reports, either against an employee or anyone that works for the institution, the local education agency. And private schools must cooperate with investigators of child abuse conducted by the Department of Human Services. The school must provide confidential access to the child alleged to be abused and to other children to obtain relevant information. And that's kind of like the basic of that. So then the next,
Marilyn, can I ask you a question about Iowa? So they have child abuse reports coming in, but is there any penalty for a mandatory reporter not reporting, or are there penalties for errors of omission?
yes. So some of the states, and I did not have this information right now, but I do have it in like my big research file that I can definitely provide
That's
to
okay.
you.
Yeah, okay.
Some states do provide, they have like misdemeanor charges. They do change kind of like the statutory code for the failure to report. So there's definitely in some states, there's definitely some things in place in case someone fails to report, or if, you know, a case is discovered and there has been some reports that they were not referred to the local agency or the law enforcement like they were supposed to. There is some kind of contingency kind of things, either fees or like, or misdemeanor charges, or in like kind of some sort of things that I can definitely provide to you after this.
Are there any states where this failure then results in penalties to the institution rather than the individual?
Not necessarily. There is actually one state, I can't fully remember, where they do, it was just one bill, and I can't remember it right now from the top of my head, but it did failure to comply with the mandatory reporting and all this. It targeted the accreditation of the school, which if it targets the accreditation of the school, it goes into everything else. So I can definitely get that one for you as well. But that one, I only saw it in one state. That's the only one I saw. And it was very specific to the mandatory reporting and like child neglect and abuse.
Thank you.
Yes. And I'll definitely provide that to you on the language and the bill itself after the meeting. So I'll make sure I'll send that over to you all.
Okay.
So now I'm going to emphasize on New Jersey. So New Jersey, a couple years back, they created the Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect. Now this one, it emphasizes that the purpose of the Task Force on Child Abuse was to study and develop recommendations regarding effective policies or means to improve the quality and scope of child protective and preventive services. So basically this was more of a coalition among all state agencies in this. So they require, part of this task force was the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner of the Department of Children and Families, the President of the State Board of Education, And then members appointed by the governor in consultation with the Department of Ed. So this included like any like school boards association, like teachers unions, principals and supervisors associations, like the New Jersey Coalition of Against Sexual Assault, Prevent Children Abuse of New Jersey. So all these different organizations that kind of came together for this. Also, they required as part of this task force to have a licensed therapy trainee to counsel and treat child sexual abuse victims, a New Jersey County prosecutor, individuals who have experience and expertise in the field of harassment, intimidation, and bullying policies, a parent of a student enrolled in an elementary or secondary school in the state, and an individual who is a survivor of child sexual abuse. So this kind of was the creation and the membership of this task force in this. The members serve, there were term limits of 3, 2, and 1 years, depending on the appointment and the time of the appointment. And then there was no compensation for the task force for this specific one. So kind of the part of this is that the Department of Education was, through this bill, the education of the department was provided with like clerical, stenographic, and just some of the administrative parts of this to just carry out the work. Again, there was consultation among state agencies and departments, and kind of the main duties of this was to gather information concerning the child sexual abuse throughout the state, to create recommendations and guidelines for school policies addressing sexual abuse of children, and then and how these recommendations could allow for accommodations for all the different types of schools. So whether they're day schools, boarding schools, any of that sort. They also review the current instructional programs and curriculum in the schools and on issues related to sexual abuse, sexual neglect, and any recommendations for teacher professionals development and training on the issue. It also created recommendations and guidelines for age-appropriate, evidence-based child sexual abuse awareness, and just created guidelines for educational materials to parents and guardians on the warning signs of child sexual abuse. And then other resources for community partners in order to help identify and investigate this sexual abuse charges. So all these reports, they have to issue a report on a biennial basis to the governor and the legislature. So this is kind of one of the bills that kind of specifically targeted a little bit of the outside and the child, making sure that child safety, rather than the academic part of things, of that.
So let's just hold right there and see if there are questions about this policy from the committee. They have a question, comment? Okay, we're good?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second state that I do want to talk about as well is Tennessee. So Tennessee basically created a single contact for abuse cases in each school, and kind of separates the investigation records from school records. So this is kind of like the one person in charge of, dealing with the schools, the child, and the law enforcement or the referral agency, whether that's Child Protective Services, whether that's Human Services, kind of like the department that takes on in case of a report that it's made. So in terms of this, so kind of like the roles of, so basically each local education agency, and this includes public and private, residential, boarding, day independent schools, that they should designate a child abuse coordinator and an alternate person abuse coordinator as well for each school. The designation, kind of like the coordinator, the job of the coordinator is one, to have access to an area that provides like privacy and access to Telephone for reporting suspected child abuse and child sexual abuse. They need to receive training in regards to mandatory reporting, multidisciplinary protocols, advocacy centers, the importance of limited interviews, signs, symptoms, and suspicions of child abuse. They must be available for school personnel to share information about suspect child abuse or child sexual abuse. And they must assist personnel in reporting suspected child abuse and child abuse to law enforcement and to the Department of Children's Services. They also serve as the liaison between the school, the department, whether that's Children's Services, Human Services, and law enforcement in child abuse and child sexual abuse. They must assist the law enforcement and department personnel by sharing available information regarding the suspected child abuse and providing kind of like the area for law enforcement and department personnel to meet and to meet with like the child and the reporting. So it's kind of like the mediator of the situation. And obviously maintaining confidential files of all these different cases. If the bill also specifies that if like a school teacher or a school counselors receive some sort of information regarding or suspicion regarding child abuse, child neglect, or child sexual abuse, they must report it immediately to the coordinator. Since that is the one person that will coordinate between law enforcement, the department, and the school itself. And then, so that's kind of like one of the basics of that bill. There's another bill that I actually, because I was looking through it this morning because I actually spoke with James.
Marilyn,
Yes.
Marilyn, we've got a question from Representative Pugh.
Yes.
Thank you, Marilyn. I may have missed it in the discussion of this. Is this a bill that has passed and is in law?
Yes, it enacted
Okay, I missed
on
that.
2019 Tennessee House Bill 2461. Yeah, all the bills that I have been talking to you about, they are enacted in the last couple of years.
And does Tennessee have a mandatory reporting bill for teachers in general? I mean, in Vermont, teachers are mandatory reporters. And our statute says you have to report directly. This seems to set up you don't report directly, you report to someone in school.
Yes, that would be correct. So teachers, like if they have a suspicion or somebody comes up to teachers regarding some sort of sexual assault or neglect or abuse to a child in a school, teachers are mandated to go to the coordinator who handles all the cases basically. So it's more of a centralized thing, but however, teachers are mandated to do that. So let's say that according to this bill, the way I read it and the way that I was kind of asked some colleagues about it as well, was to, as soon as that person is known, they do have to like report it. But if they report it to like law enforcement, for example, if let's say that for whatever reason, the coordinator is not available at that time, or it's not in school or something, you know, like that, they are mandated to report it to law enforcement or to the Department of Children's Services. However, as soon as that also, it is required to let know to the coordinator as well. So basically after that is reported, basically the coordinator takes over the case and it becomes the mediator among the school, the agency, and the child. So kind of leaving the teacher more of the outside, and now this person takes on kind of all the conversation and who has so most of this, I went into the Tennessee Department of Education and Children's Services, and that they have a very thorough kind of training on for the coordinators where it's just a lot more advanced on how to handle the conversations with the children, how to, like, it goes very, very specific into, you know, the training of these coordinators. So teachers are still mandated reporters. However, it's kind of like they do their duty to report, and then after that, kind of like they're done with that, and then the coordinator takes over.
So, just so I get it, haven't had enough coffee this morning. I'm a teacher and I witness, I'm concerned about abuse or neglect in the school. I report it to two entities. I report it to either the police or the child abuse reporting agency, and I report it to this person in a school.
Yes. So this school basically has been, according to this, what Tennessee did, basically, they, like each school has to designate a coordinator for it. And this will be the person that would be handling kind of all that. So teachers usually report, like, you know, if they have to report, they will report it to the coordinator, and then the coordinator will do all the rest of the stuff that they have to do, such as report it to law enforcement, the department.
Okay, see, that's different. That is different in Vermont. You are still required, even if there's internal policy that says, tell so-and-so.
Yeah.
You are still responsible. And so that sounds, it's different than Tennessee.
Yeah, and honestly, most of the states are similar to Vermont. Most of the states, you know, they have the mandatory reporting for teachers. And they must, obviously there's the internal policies and stuff, but by law, they must report it to law enforcement and like child services or human services. So that is the case for most states. I would say Tennessee is one of the few ones that has one specific person that handles kind of all the cases of child abuse.
Can I?
Yep, Representative Pahala has a question.
So just clarification, whoever the single contact is required to take any suspected incident to law enforcement. There's no way for that person to not move a case forward.
Yeah, they're mandated to report it. That is correct.
Thank you.
Other questions at this point? Marilyn, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and one more bill actually, because honestly, this is something that when this request came to me, I was kind of, I was familiar with private schools and, you know, the accreditation and all that part, but I hadn't looked a lot into the outside of academics. So I've been doing a lot of deep research into this, and I'm kind of in disbelief of how little there is in regards to, you know, the outside of academics perspective. I did found another bill that I did not put it on this because I was still going through like all my files and everything. And I'm like, I can't believe I haven't been able to find this. There was another bill from the state of Alabama that was from 2017. And they do talk, this one, it's very targeted to residential schools, boarding schools, just any sort of residency where it keeps kids for over 24 hours, right? And they kind of acknowledge the abuse that happens at some of these schools. They act like this bill kind of acknowledge that there needs to be something done in regards to for the safety of the kids, the abuse, the trauma, the neglect, and just kind of the facilities and all that sense. However, as I read the bill, kind of like over and over and over, there's really not so much, again, to what you were referring earlier today, but there's some stuff that happens. So in this bill, just some of the stuff that I kind of highlighted was that it offers, you know, they must offer like any sort of school, and the way they refer it to is any religious, faith-based, or church nonprofit, other nonprofit, or for-profit affiliation with youth residential facilities, youth social rehabilitation facilities, community treatment facilities for youth, youth transitional care facilities, long-term youth residential facilities, private alternative boarding schools, private alternative outdoor programs, or any other organization entrusted with the residential care of children in any organizational form or combination by this section. So whether it's education, that with whenever children are housed at a facility or location of the program for a period of more than 24 hours. At a minimum, registered youth residential institution or organization under this section must basically prepare and maintain a current written plan of operation. They must offer 24 hours non-medical care and supervision to youth who are voluntarily admitted by a parent or legal guardian. They must provide written notification on standard form to the department or local county Department of Human Resources offices where the facility is located. The enrollment and
Marilyn,
yes,
Marilyn, I think what might be extremely helpful to us is for you to send a link to the Alabama policy.
Okay.
What you're reading. Can you do that?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, because
And then
this one was.
Yeah, I think at this point, because our schedule has been affected by outside activities, and
Yes,
I think it would be
totally
great
understand.
if we could move to questions at this point, and then we'll have the Alabama information that you're sending to us. I suspect that you are not going to be a stranger to us, whether it's the education committees, human services, or health and welfare, and possibly judiciary. So
Yes.
you obviously have a great deal of knowledge in this area, and we greatly appreciate what you brought to us.
No, thank you so much. And yes, I'll put all these different bills together and just get all the bills and send them to you in one batch. So I'll just make sure I'll do this and kind of highlight one of the main parts of it, and I'll just send it your way. And again, yeah, I would love to come back and actually be in person with y'all. So yeah,
Good. That's good. We'll like to have you. I'm gonna reach out at this point to Senator Campion and Representative Webb to see if they have any questions.
No, not at this time, but this has been extremely helpful, and we look forward to engaging you in our committees as well this coming winter. Thanks, Marilyn.
No, thank you so much. And I'll make sure I'll send this to probably Peggy, and like all the information, all the bills, kind of everything that I shared with you all today in more of a links and, more of a Word format than a presentation. And I'll send it your way, and then you let me know questions, and moving forward, what can I do for you all?
Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you. And for House Education, thank you so much for this information. It's very helpful, and looking forward to continued work.
Thank you.
Terrific. This is great. Senator Sears is Chair of Judiciary, in addition to being on our Child Protection Oversight Committee, and I didn't know whether you wanted to ask a separate question, Senator Sears.
No, not really. I think Maryland did an excellent job of covering what's going on in the states, and I'm intrigued by particularly Tennessee. It seems to me that, we need to find a way to get ahead of this before we have another breakout like we did at Manhattan. I thank Maryland, and I look forward to working with health and welfare on this.
Yeah, thank you. And the Tennessee bill actually came out of something that happened in some of the residential boarding schools that happened in Tennessee. So this bill came out.
Isn't that the case?
Yeah.
It's okay. I guess my question for you, and I don't know that you need to go into depth in answering it, but it would be helpful to know, are there any state policies that are more preventive than reactive? Because I think most of what we've heard about is reporting abuse after it happens, rather than some kind of supporting program or trainings or investigative programs that maintain a preventive environment. So just if there are any, I think that interests me greatly. And so if there are any of those across the states.
My immediate response, the answer to that, the immediate response is no. However, there is in some of the legislation that I've seen, there is some kind of required for like awareness, sexual child abuse, neglect awareness. and hotlines and how to prevent it and a lot of that kind of campaign. So there's some of that that I can think of right now from the top of my head, but I can definitely look more into it. But I can say that this is definitely a topic that it's not very developed. And I feel like, you know, all the questions that you all are asking, I think Vermont could be one of the leading states in kind of leading this kind of policy. So.
Thank you. If you come across any policies that are proactive, that would be great. And when you come back, we'll hear about those in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think questions from committee members at this point. It's Marilyn Villalobos, and we thank you very much for providing us with an in-depth overview of what's going on across the country. But obviously you've just scratched the surface. So it sounds like our education committees and our health and human services committees and our judiciary is very interested in what you know. So we'll see you again in Vermont. I do think so.
I look forward to it, and hopefully I'll get to be there in person.
Terrific. Just not in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yes.
We don't want that either. Well, I guess we do, but not for travel. Okay, any other questions, committee? Folks, thanks so much. This has been great, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thanks again, Marilyn.
Peggy, are other witnesses available?
I reached out to all of them and they said they're joining soon.
Good.
Yep, I told them we were ahead of schedule.
So, and while we're waiting for that, my thinking is for each of us to put our thinking caps on, look through the information that we've gotten, and then the recommendations that we make don't necessarily have to be full legislative language, but they certainly could include some principles of protection for kids. I'm interested more in the prevention aspect and making sure that it's not just reactive, although reactive is also part of it. So think about that, and then we'll put that onto, I think we can do it next meeting and have a more robust discussion about what recommendations we would like to make.
Probably because it was when the volume was low. I think I missed some of the
Me too.
information in the beginning around, and maybe that was more from the update from the Agency of Education in terms of what their proposed rule means and how it in fact would address what happened. You know, I mean, right.
I'm not sure we got that information.
It's like they started in the middle. They started with, here's the policy. They didn't give us any of the prelude to how they got to that language that it was. So it was kind of like, oh.
Well, you know.
And I'm just, I mean, it felt like, it seemed, and this is where I might not have heard everything. It seemed that they were focused again on the educational aspects and when you sleep somewhere, when you go to school and you sleep there, whatever we're going to call it, there's another aspect. And if none of the accreditation standards address what I would call the
extracurricular.
Okay, extracurricular activities or a broader construct of what is considered education, then is that something, do they have to be duly licensed or something like that?
That was something I was thinking about because the proposed rule seems like that the outcome potentially changes the designation of the school program. It doesn't do anything to regulate the residential part of the program. And that seems to be the,
problematic.
where the bigger concern lies. And
Well, and I guess I realize is this, the situation that brought this to our attention, is that sort of unique to that school? Because that really wasn't a school. I mean, yes, it did provide education.
Right.
But it was,
It's a residential program.
it was a residential program for, that provided education. And then when the Department of Children and Families that regulates residential programs said, we are not going to, you know, whatever, you don't fit anymore. Then the Department of Ed go, oh, well, it's okay, you're a school now.
Yeah, this is the problem that we face, and certainly we've heard enough, not just in our state, but other states, about what's going on at boarding schools, the so-called boarding schools. So, and so I'm wondering, Katie, if you think there is additional information that we need as we're thinking about recommendations. I know that you and Jim Demery have worked hard on this. But if you think of something, or maybe just let us know, share it. I know that Jim has been through the list of independent schools. You worked with AOE. You have looked at our statutes on this. I don't know what other information you might help us with, but so just to keep us on our toes, I think, yeah.
Just,
Go ahead.
I have to profess, I don't understand it all in relationship to it, but, and I know it's after the fact, but what Tennessee kind of, what I was intrigued about is there's a dual track of records and a dual track of doing stuff. Because a lot of times when someone reports to one person and then there's this hesitancy to point any fingers and everything. So I am interested in a comparison of what we do now and what that dual track that they might set up. Because
You know, it's interesting to me, when I think of a kid, I think of the whole child.
Yep.
So I'm trying to figure out how it's not a dual program, although you have experts in child development and you have experts in education, yet we know that all our education programs include training and child development and at different stages, so. This will be this is an interesting place to be right now.
I was just thinking, when it gets reported by the teacher, if the teacher's reporting it to one place, in this case, we're after the fact, something has happened, and, you know, a lot of the times the first tendency is, well, that's really not a bad person, and so sometimes with two eyes after the fact, in that it just, that dual track, after the fact, I thought, I just want to understand it better compared to what we're doing.
Well, think about a recommendation that you would like to make. Because I think, you know, whatever recommendations we make, then those can be taken up by committees of jurisdiction and follow, you know, however it works. And I think a lot of this is going to have to be collaborative.
Yeah.
You know, I can't see 10 bills coming out about this. I don't, you know.
That wouldn't be good.
I'd like to see one, maybe two at the most. Anyway. All right, Peggy, any luck with our, I see that Judge Grierson is here.
Yep, Erica said she'll be here any second. Beth is on her way.
Oh, great.
Actually, they're all here.
Let's take a 2-minute break, please. Huh?
They just joined.
Oh, they just joined. Oh, we're not, okay.
Still seem to be taking.
That's the whole thing. We're good. We still have a quorum. So good. And just, so Senator Campion and Representative Webb, you are absolutely welcome to stay around and listen to the Family First Plan discussion if you would like. I don't want to.
Thanks so much. I have a feeling that anything Beth Sawsbill says is worth sticking around for. So I will stick around for just a little bit, if that's all right. See, Senator Sears is disagreeing with me, but I want to be on the record that no question it's worth saying, hearing.
Campion, that was beyond the pale.
Wait, does that mean that we're looking at someone from Bennington County?
Oh, one of the best.
That's what I thought.
All right, I will stick around for a little bit. Thank you.
That's the west end of Bennington that is behind Beth.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Looks pretty good right now, doesn't it? My
It's the
God.
banana belt down there.
Looks
We
amazing.
could all use that.
Thank you.
Okay, terrific.
Senator
Representative
Lyons,
Webb,
Senator Lyons, I'm probably going to leave, but I will definitely be watching it I will definitely watch the testimony on YouTube.
terrific.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. No, that's great. This is great. And we'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to the Family First Plan. We have Deputy Commissioner Radke here. We have Senior. She's right there.
Oh, sorry.
She's right there.
I didn't see, sorry, Deputy Commissioner, I didn't see you.
And we have Beth Sousville, Jennifer Herbert, and the Honorable Judge Grierson. Everyone is here who will comment, provide us with information about the Family First Plan. I did send out a long list of questions. Some may be more or less relevant in terms of your interest, but we would love to hear what you have to say in response to those as you present the plan. So Deputy Commissioner Radke, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm really happy to be here. For the record, again, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. And as the Senator mentioned, I do have here with me today Beth Sawsbill, FSD's FFPSA lead, and Jennifer Herbert, DCF Clinical Director. I'd really like to thank the committee for inviting us to discuss Vermont's FFPSA prevention plan and for taking the time to review the plan and to ask such thoughtful questions. As you know, the plan was submitted to the Children's Bureau on October 1st. Our submission was indeed timely, but that's just the first step to this process. From now, what goes on is that the Bureau will begin to review the plan, and there'll be sort of some interaction, give and take between us and the Bureau. It's really an ongoing dialogue, an exchange of ideas about the content of the plan, which will result in amendments and modifications to the plan over the course of the next several months. But we do believe ultimately, after all of this give and take, we will ultimately have approval of the plan by the feds. So you can tell just by the nature of the approval process that some, but not all the questions that you've posed today won't have a definitive answer just yet, because the plan will continue to evolve as we engage in discussions with the Children's Bureau until we reach a consensus with them. But there are questions that the committee has asked, however, that can be addressed right now. For instance, we haven't yet heard, we haven't received any feedback yet from the federal government. But because the ultimate goals of the FFPSA really represents a new way of thinking about DCF's role in child welfare, we're using this time in planning to shift into implementation, to be really intentional in focusing on the front door in terms of child welfare interventions, and with the intent to keep children from coming into custody in the first place whenever possible. So as part of this process, we're collaborating with internal partners such as Dale, DMH, and the Director of Trauma-Informed Services and AHS, as well as external partners such as BCAP, Easter Seals, and NFI, as well as individuals with lived experience such as the survivors group from the St. Joseph's Orphanage. And we're doing all of this in an effort to ensure that we bring a well-rounded, well-based approach to programs, services, and training in preparation for implementation. And as far as training, it's critical to us that our staff have the necessary tools to effectively meet the needs of the children and families we're serving pursuant to FFPSA. But likewise, we're also committed to finding innovative ways to making sure our community partners have access to training as well. So moving forward with the prevention plan, I do have to say that the system will call for increased demands on our IT system, which will of course have a need for increased investment. But the purpose of a modernized IT system is to improve DCF's capability for data collection and analysis, which in turn informs our decision-making related to practice and services intended to improve the outcomes for the children and youth in DCF custody, which is absolutely always our primary focus in terms of time, energy, and investment as a department. A comprehensive child welfare information system will only enhance our ability to do our work. The prevention plan was intentionally designed to be an interactive, ongoing process to occur over a course of 5 years, with us having the ability to make changes to the plan as we learn from our experiences around prevention planning. So towards that end, we envision using EBPs housed within FSD for the first year of the plan. But as we process and begin to learn procedures with other state entities, and as those relationships begin to solidify, we anticipate weaving into the plan our intent to move forward with some EBPs that are housed outside of our division, beginning at around year 2 and beyond. So in closing, DCF is very hopeful about what we can do in terms of using the FFPSA to not only bolster and enhance our best practices, but really to further our mission to work with families, caregivers, partner agencies, and the community to help Vermont's children and youth stay safe. So that concludes my prepared remarks. Beth, Jen, and I are really interested in hearing if you have any additional questions from your list or any other questions that we can answer right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And overall, you know, as you present the intent and the rationale for the plan, it fits with a lot of our interests. The questions that we sent, I think, were specifically about some of the things that are included in the plan and maybe some explanation for those things. So do you have, Jennifer and Beth have specific responses to the questions that we asked? How are you organizing this?
Would it make sense for you to read each question?
Well,
and
I've
see
got,
if
there's a
they have
long
things?
list of questions that I sent to the committee. And I guess I'd like to start out with a question about acronyms, and if there's a way that we could get a grasp on all the acronyms that are there. I know that some of us are more familiar with these things than others, but the one that confounded me for a long time was EBP, because I couldn't find it in the body of the plan. And is it there or not? I just, I looked for it. I think it was EBP was used first on page 6, but it wasn't spelled out. I'll ask that, and then I'll just go through some of the questions that we have.
Thank you for that. We did try to provide a little bit of an overview of those acronyms in one of our prior slide decks. But yes, I'm in the process of working through the entire plan. We did hear that loud and clear, and I will get that to you very shortly.
So can you give us a definition of EBP?
Evidence-based programs.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's very helpful. Evidence-based program.
I just want to say thank you first. And clearly you all must have been working until midnight on October 1st, since when we met on October 1st, you said you didn't have the plan ready and you couldn't share it with us then. So I'm appreciative of the fact that even though we met on October 1st and you didn't have a plan to share with us, that somehow you were able to finish something by midnight that day. As you said, you got it in on time.
You know, actually, I believe the time was it 4:30 or 5, Beth, that we needed to get it in?
It was a little bit after hours that day with a lot of last minute kind of tweaks and yes, revisions.
So if you were on the West Coast, you would have met the deadline.
We would have used that excuse if we had to. I will neither confirm nor deny any last minute rushing.
Oh, thank you. I agree with Representative Pugh. It was good to see that it got in on time. So I'm going to ask a question about meeting the goals within the plan. And if we don't achieve some of the goals in the plan, are there penalties associated with that?
Beth, would you handle that one? I remember we talked about that question and it had sort of a yes and no answer. I think you really captured it well, how to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially within the prevention plan, because the shift from intervention to prevention, which is a primary component of the Family First legislation, is brand new. There is no penalty. The only caveat to it is that we can't start drawing down until we start service provision for the prevention candidates. So, you know, the sooner that we're able to kind of pull that system together and start providing those services to those identified in our candidacy definitions will be the soonest that we're able to draw down that Title IV funding for prevention.
Okay. There's another question here regarding the data collection required through the decision-making process and the cost of doing that every 6 months, both in terms of workforce and money. So can you talk about the case review process that's being described every 6 months and what you anticipate to be the needs associated with that?
You know, in terms of the case review process, Beth will be able to handle the details of that. But as far as the cost, because we're still actively looking into trying to get our CWIS system, at least that first module, and we're still looking at different ways of compiling that information, we don't have a set cost. You know, we haven't set a cost allocation out at this time. It's still rather up in the air. But in terms of the actual process, Beth can absolutely describe that.
Sure. So the case review process actually began within our division prior to the Family First legislation. We have been working on a case review process for many years with the feds as a way to supplement the federal case review process. And as a way to provide some internal checks and balances for our work and our practices as it relates to statute and policy. So that process will continue. There will be additional requests and needs of data collection And I think that Deputy Radke spoke to that eloquently, in that we're not really sure what that additional workload will look like quite yet, because we haven't begun to engage in that. But there's additional requirements for data collection with regard to our EBP selection and ongoing. But much of the other pieces of that have been woven in, although archaic, many times hand counting, Excel spreadsheet oriented data collection. So that will obviously continue until we have a more robust system in place.
So it sounds like IT, as the commissioner said, is pretty basic to achieving the goals in the plan. The federal government, yep. And just a second question to that, is the federal government providing any resources whatsoever for the implementation of this, including IT?
You know, in terms of the CWIS system, there's the possibility of getting a 50% match from the federal government if we're able to make a commitment to expanding out for all of the modules of the CWIS system. So we're really hopeful that that type of investment could be, you know, made. So yes, the feds absolutely will be able to step up and help with that, because it is a significant investment.
So that kind of suggests another question that I had, and that is with regard to legislative action for the implementation of this. I noticed under legislative action, your comments were that the legislature is interested in, the legislature will help us, but there must be places within the plan or the action plan that is developed where we're going to have to do something. So have you got, I mean, do you have a sense or some ideas for us to begin to process?
We have had some discussions in terms of initiatives, and you know, those talks are ongoing, and I'm really not able to get into the details at this point.
Sounds like it's a budget. Thank you. Okay, that's good. I understand, but the sooner we are forewarned, the sooner we can begin working on some of the legislative needs that are there.
Perhaps I will just say out loud that the limitation on policy changes and requests for a policy change, we legislators need to make our initial sort of request for help from legislative counsel for drafting is within the month by the end. So we need to make our first drafting
December 1st.
by December 1st.
It might be different for the House, but they're both December this year.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
And so I just want to sort of put that out there as the Department of Children and Families and the Family Services Division goes through its process of what are the words that we want to change as contrasted to what the two members to my left who fits it on appropriations, which is where did the dollars come from and what dollars are. You may have a little bit more time for that.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then perhaps others will as well. This is the question that we started to dive into last time regarding the Family Services Division policy that you have on page 122, policy 122 on page 29, that indicates resolution within 30 days. So when, I mean, can that happen given our workforce concerns, and what is the consequence of that goal for both the executive branch and for the judicial branch? And I know that Judge Grierson is here, and this is something we started looking at last time. So maybe you could give us your thoughts on that, and then we'd ask Judge Grierson to weigh in as well. Did you hear me?
I can speak to that, sure.
Okay.
So I think we laid forth kind of a best practice timeline last time. And I apologize upfront to Judge Grierson that he hadn't seen that prior to us sharing it with you all. So I apologize for that. But essentially, we feel like the 30-day assessment for the within the qualified residential treatment program process of Family First is achievable with the strict deadlines that we have given within our contract parameter. Having said that, as it relates to the workforce, there again, I think that it is the way that we are hoping to couch that into our current policies and procedures, I believe is also doable with some additional training and support around achieving best practice for children and youth in terms of that match between what is clinically appropriate and what is available and the process in between. So I know that the judiciary, and Judge Grierson will certainly speak to this, continues to be concerned, as we do. The pandemic has placed a lot of additional pressures on the judiciary and that process. But in terms of the 30-day assessment process, we are confident that we can meet the deadlines of that piece of the legislation.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying, given the current staffing, you're confident that you can do that? Okay.
Yes. I mean, it is staffing. It's always an issue, and really it seems like it's statewide and definitely within the child welfare system. But as Beth touched on, and I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is going to depend on our training as far as best practices and really giving our team the tools to make sure that they can build in these efficiencies to meet that deadline. I mean, we've got a great team, and when they dig in and really make a goal, they're able to meet them. So we're very confident we can do the 30 days.
Okay, and you did comment on the training piece. I know that the motivational interview piece is so critical. I know that there are some of your contracted organizations already doing that, and that the training is taking place. But so a couple of questions there. How is that training going to be expanded, and how is it going to reach our community partners? And then knowing that some of the training that's going on by UVM is online, but then you've indicated that it's not accessible by community. So I'm trying to sort out how all of the training is going to go on.
That's a very good question. As far as the motivational interviewing piece, we've already sent a group out to have that training, and it's going to be each one teach one. We'll bring individuals back that have had the actual training to come back to the districts and expand the training that way. One, because it's always nice to be trained by a peer, and two, it's a cost savings for us. So that's one way for motivational interviewing. And there will be not only our staff internally, but also the barge providers. And we're still working out how to get the training to our community partners. It's something that the training working group is looking at. There aren't any definitive answers. We may be partnering with the Child Welfare Training Partnership, but we may also be expanding to do look at other innovative ways to make sure that the training is getting out to those partners as well, because it's important to us, because it really helps us build a foundation to have well-trained community partners to make sure FFPSA really gets off the ground. So it's not something that we'll be sort of leaving to, just hope and a dream. It'll be intentional. We just haven't come together with a plan yet.
Okay,
Beth, I'm
so
sure you'd like to add. Beth, do you have anything to add in terms of training?
I was just going to add that Another element that we are intentionally looking forward to is that within our prevention implementation work group, which will begin more toward the point in time when our plan is closer to approval, that will intentionally involve the providers of the 2 evidence-based program services as a way to for a consistent feedback loop and also for continuous quality assurance around training and ongoing support.
Thank you. So, yeah, I noticed that you're using the Lund Family Center for home for substance use disorder training. And the issue that kind of rises to the top for me is the mental health needs that we're seeing and how that's going to be handled. So what I'm hearing you say is this is a plan, and now you're putting together an action plan. I know that Representative Jessup had a similar question, had a very good question on that. When do we get to see the timeline, you know, and the action plan for this and going forward? And because it seems like it's a huge community process, maybe.
I mean, do you have a structured, whether it's a PERT plan or a Gantt chart that is actually outlining the timeframes and when decisions get made and things like that we could see, so that perhaps we could have some input now? Because as you said, our opportunity for input came after you submitted the plan. And so let's figure out where that opportunity can happen by seeing your whole program planning implementation schedule, because I imagine you have something like that.
We have worked with the Center for States with a Gantt chart for our prevention plan, and we're in the process of, we just renewed our contract with them and commitment, and we are working on that very piece right now to help us to identify, you know, going forward, at least for the next year, what needs to happen when. And so as soon as that's available, we're happy to share that with you.
Good, that's great. Go ahead, Representative Jessup. Oh,
I'd
sorry.
like to add just one thing, though. I do want to make sure that you understand that really the plan itself is sort of a living document. Things will change and shift as you get feedback from the Fed. So nothing is really set in stone right now until we actually get that approval. And then even then, of course, we still have the ability to make amendments. So, you know, the timeline will be our best guess as to what we think we will be able to move forward with.
So, listen, what you just said about the feedback from the feds, I think is very important. So as you get that feedback through a letter or communication, can you please share that with the committees of jurisdiction? So Representative Pugh's committee and Health and Welfare Committee, and to the extent needed, the Appropriations Committee and possibly Judiciary. So if it would be helpful for us to stay in the loop. I know that it might feel like a burden, but otherwise we'll run into the end of the train wreck, which we don't want.
Would you be going to ask her for her prepared remarks?
Yeah, so with sincere thoughts that we would like to continue further. There are a number of folks sitting here that need to be somewhere else at 12 o'clock. And as I said in my email, when I sent the questions, we would like to continue this conversation. And I know I very much appreciate the time that you're taking today, the work that you've done on the plan, and your ability to explain the process to us. And so we would like to maybe put this on another agenda, and I'll have Peggy get in touch about probably maybe the next meeting that we have, so that we can follow through with this in more detail, because it is an important step.
Oh, that would be
I
wonderful.
just-
We'd welcome that opportunity.
Terrific. And it would be great if you could bring in, now that you've seen our questions and the type of concerns that we have, it would be terrific if you could maybe provide some written remarks for us from each of you. And we may be missing questions, so you can point us in the right direction so we fully understand what this plan is doing.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to take a lunch break at this time, and we will be back at 1 o'clock. And I believe Judge Pearson, you'll be back with us at that time. So that's.
Say what, 1 o'clock is when you're going to reconvene?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'll be there.
All right. Thank